Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is notify. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear notify used is to mean to inform someone of something. And this verb is rather formal, so when we're telling or sharing some information, we tend to use this verb notify if we sort of have a formal manner of doing this, or maybe even an official manner. A second way you might hear notify used is to mean to give notice of something or to report something. Again, this tends to be done rather formally or officially, right? So as I share information with my family or friends, I wouldn't really say I notified them that I will be going to this place in time, right? That's too formal and official for more casual communication. But you might hear this word used a great deal at work and even in commands, right? Notify me when something happens. You should know that notify is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, all we need to do is add ing to form notifying. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are going to require a spelling change. So our verb ends with the letter Y, so we're going to drop the Y, add an I before we add ed. Our base verb, notify, I, ends in a vowel sound, and all vowel sounds are voiced. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound. It should sound like this: notified, notified. Okay. Now, let's take a look at one phrasal verb. It doesn't really change the meaning too much, but notify of is a pretty common thing that you might see. And again, our meaning here is we're letting someone know about someone or something, or we're trying to bring attention to something. Again, making people aware of something. So, an example here: please notify us of any problems, right? So perhaps you're staying somewhere, or you're working with a new team or in a new environment, right? And here is that example of a command, an imperative. Whoever's communicating this statement wants to know if there's an issue. Okay. Now, all this week, we are going to talk about the active and the passive voice. The majority of the videos I do focus on active voice sentences, and it's far more common to hear and see those. But as you advance your level of English and begin reading different texts, you will see some passive voice sentences, and it can be good for us to kind of practice and look at that construction. So let's start with what we normally do, and that's an active voice sentence, okay? So in active voice, we begin with the person or the thing that is responsible for the action. So this is the subject of our sentence. I have two examples here. Brad will wash the dishes. Okay? In that sentence, I know Brad is the person who is responsible for the action of washing. And the second sentence, Caroline will eat lunch. Right? Here in the second sentence, I know Caroline is responsible for the action of eating. Okay? Now, let's talk about passive voice sentences. These are going to begin with the object, or the person or thing that is acted on or that receives the action. In a passive voice sentence, the person who actually did the action, or who is responsible for the action, they may not even be included or mentioned. Or if they are included, they're going to come at the end of the sentence after the preposition by. So I can take my first two examples and I could say, the dishes will be washed, right? Or I could say the dishes will be washed by Brad. Okay? Those sentences are both in passive voice. And I can do the same to my second example. Lunch will be eaten. Okay? And I could always tack on by and the name of a person or group who is responsible for that action of eating. So it's natural for many people to ask, why do we have the passive voice? And why do we have to, have yet another way of constructing English sentences? But there are a few different reasons people will use the passive voice. It might be because they don't know who is responsible for the action, right? So just starting with that object is sort of clearer or easier. A second reason is perhaps the person who is responsible for the action, it just isn't important. And that sort of connects to our third reason. It's possible that a writer or a speaker really wants us to focus our attention. So starting the sentence with that object sometimes gets us to pay a little more attention. And then a fourth reason, we may know who is responsible for something, but if it's kind of a bad thing, a bad action, we might use the passive voice to avoid blaming someone and kind of saying they are responsible for this mistake, this error, this bad action, right? With that reason, I always think of the sentence, mistakes were made, right? So it's acknowledging, right? Someone made a mistake, but it's not telling us who is responsible for that mistake. So today we are going to practice making some sample sentences with our verb of the day, notify, in both the active voice and the passive voice. And I hope that will help us kind of see those differences and how we do that. Today we're going to focus on making sentences in the simple future using will. Okay, so let's look at active voice because I'm confident you know this structure, right? So we're going to start with our subject, we will use will, and then we'll use the base verb. So an example here of an active voice sentence, the organization will notify scholarship recipients by May 1st. Okay. Right now, there are a lot of high school and college students filling out scholarship applications, and so you might see a sentence like this in connection to those application materials. Okay. But in the passive voice, right, the person receiving the action here, the people receiving the scholarship, right, we could move that to the front of the sentence. Okay, so scholarship recipients, and then our structure will be will plus be plus the participle form of the verb. So our participle here is the same because it's a regular verb. So a more common sentence you might hear or see in connection would be scholarship recipients will be notified by May 1st. Right? So if this particular organization is listing all of their rules, the eligibility, the requirements to apply, it might seem like, well, it's obvious, like we are responsible for this action. So we're just going to say the recipients will be informed. Okay. Now let's look at making negative active voice sentences. Our structure here is, again, to start with the subject, the person or thing that's responsible for our action. Then we're going to use will, not, and then our base verb. You might hear the contraction form won't. Okay, so an example here, the school won't notify instructors if students in their classes test positive for COVID-19. Okay. As we deal with the pandemic, a lot of school policies have shifted, and I saw a statement similar to this as sort of an updated policy in one school district. Okay, so they are not going to be informed. This information will not be communicated going forward. Okay, now the real sentence I saw is our passive voice here. So again, our structure will be who's receiving that information. So here it's instructors, teachers. Then we're going to use will not, be, and then our participle form, the verb. So a passive voice. Instructors will not be notified if students in their class test positive for COVID-19. And if this information is coming from the superintendent, leaders within a school, it might be obvious. Again, us, the people in charge, we will not be communicating that information. Finally, let's look at making yes or no questions. Okay? In the active voice, we start with will, then we have our subject, the person who's responsible, or people who are responsible for the action, then our base verb. So here's another example. Will a company notify applicants who were not selected for an interview? This is a question many job applicants have, right? If I don't get the job, are you going to communicate that? And for many companies and many organizations, they don't. You might submit an application and never hear anything again. You might submit an application, have an interview, and then never hear anything else ever again. It kind of depends on the organization. In the passive voice, again, we'll start with will, and then we're noting the person or people who receive the action. Okay, so will applicants who were not selected for an interview be notified? Okay, so will, and then our object here is a little bit longer. Applicants who were not selected for an interview, that's the object. And then we have our be and our participle notified. Okay, so last thing to note here, the two affirmative examples I gave you, they really have the same meaning, as do the two negatives and our two yes or no questions. They're just different ways to make those statements or ask those questions. Now, let's take a moment to look at some words that are related to our verb notify. And the first word we're going to talk about is the noun notification. This is the action of notifying someone or something. Okay? So, an example of this: the state is changing the requirements for victim notification before releasing crime files. Okay? So, this again is a rather official law or policy, and that probably motivates the use here of notification. Again, kind of a formal sharing of information, and that's what this sentence is talking about. Now, another way you might hear this noun used is in push notification. Right? If you have a smartphone or a tablet, even some computers, they will send you automated messages through applications when the application isn't open. Right? So you might see something kind of pop up on your phone showing you that you've received an email. Or maybe in social media, someone has sent you a friend request, or written some other kind of note, or tagged you in a photo, right? The options are kind of limitless. But again, the idea here is an automated message. So an example of how I've heard many people use this in a sentence: I need to turn off the push notifications for that app. It's too disruptive. And that's an experience many people have now with their phones kind of constantly lighting up or even making sounds to notify them of new information, new things. So I also included a picture here on the bottom right hand of the screen in case you're a little unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, right? So you can see kind of the home screen on this phone, and you can see 3 different push notifications from different apps. The last word I'm going to leave you with today is the adjective notifiable. So this describes something that must be reported to appropriate authorities. And the most common way I saw this was actually used in connection to illnesses and diseases, and that doctors, public health officials have a duty to report certain things so that our government can kind of track how well certain conditions are being managed. So examples here: malaria, measles, and mumps are all notifiable conditions. Right? So these are things where we have the ability to vaccinate and protect ourselves. And again, we want to be on alert in case there would be an outbreak. So that and kind of large populations contracting these diseases. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.